My name is James. I'm 29 years old and I've been working as a private driver for Brian Harrington for the past 2 years. It's a good job, better than good actually. The pay is excellent, the hours are relatively predictable, and Brian treats me with the kind of respect that's rare in this line of work. I've driven for wealthy clients before who viewed me as nothing more than part of the vehicle, an extension of the steering wheel rather than a person. Brian has never been like that. He learns the names of my nieces and nephews, remembers to ask about my mother when she's ill, and always insists I take his leftover dinner when we've been out late, and he knows I haven't had time to eat, which is probably why I've developed feelings for him that go far beyond the professional boundaries of our relationship. Feelings I've become quite skilled at concealing behind a carefully maintained mask of friendly professionalism. Brian is 36, the founder and CEO of a technology company that specializes in cybersecurity solutions. He started the company in his garage 8 years ago and has built it into a respected mid-sized firm with clients ranging from local businesses to government agencies. He's brilliant, driven, and works harder than anyone I've ever known. He's also thoughtful, genuinely humble despite his success, and possesses a dry sense of humor that catches people off guard because he looks so serious most of the time. And yes, he's attractive in that effortlessly masculine way, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair that's perpetually a week past needing a trim, blue eyes that change from navy to cobalt depending on what he's wearing, and the kind of smile that transforms his whole face on the rare occasion something breaks through his professional reserve. Not that I've been paying particularly close attention. Our routine's well established by now. I pick him up from his downtown apartment each morning at 7:30, drive him to his office or to meetings across the city, wait if needed, or return later to collect him, and generally remain on call until he's safely home in the evening. Some days are long, others mercifully short, when he decides to work from home or finishes early to go for a run, one of the few activities I know he does purely for himself. The arrangement works smoothly, our interaction comfortable within its clearly defined parameters. I know exactly where I stand with Brian as his trusted driver, perhaps even something approaching a friend, but never anything more. He's never given any indication that he might be interested in men, with the occasional mention of ex-girlfriends in his polite responses to the flirtations of women we encounter in his professional sphere. So I've made a peace with the situation, content with a job I enjoy and an employer I respect, and if sometimes in unguarded moments I allow myself to imagine a different kind of relationship between us. Until the night everything changed. It began as a typical Wednesday. I'd driven Brian to his office in the morning, then to a lunch meeting at an upscale restaurant downtown, then back to his office. Around 5 he texted to let me know he had a dinner meeting with a potential client, asking me to pick him up at 8 from Archer's, an exclusive steakhouse known for its private dining rooms and extensive wine cellar. I arrived 10 minutes early, as is my habit, parking in the designated area for drivers and sending Brian a brief message to let him know I was there whenever he was ready. This was our standard procedure, allowing him to conclude his business without feeling rushed by my presence. At 8:05, my phone buzzed with a text from Brian: meeting running long, important client, probably another hour. This wasn't unusual business. Dinners frequently extended beyond their scheduled time, particularly when things were going well. I settled in for the wait, turning on a podcast and making myself as comfortable as possible in the driver's seat of the Mercedes S-Class that Brian insisted on providing as my work vehicle. 1 hour stretch total. Then nearly 3 I received occasional updates from Brian, each only apologizing for the delay but explaining that the potential contract was significant and the client was fine. Up after several glasses of wine, I assured him it was fine, though I was beginning to wonder what kind of business discussion could possibly be productive after 3 hours of dinner and drinks. At nearly 11, the restaurant's valet approached my window. "Are you waiting for Mr. Harrington?" he asked, his expression suggesting concern. "Yes," I replied, immediate alert. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong exactly," the valet said diplomatically, "but he and Mr. Donovan have been enjoying themselves quite extensively. The manager asked me to check if his driver was still available." I understood the subtext immediately. Brian was drunk, something I'd rarely seen in our 2 years together. He occasionally had a glass of wine with dinner or a scotch at a work function, but he prided himself on his self-control and clear-headedness, often saying that he couldn't afford to be less than sharp when making business decisions. "I'll come in," I told the valet, turning off the podcast and pocketing my phone. The interior of Archer's was all dark wood leather and subdued lighting designed to make its wealthy patrons feel ensconced in exclusive ellery. The maître d' recognized me immediately. I'd waited inside for Brian on previous occasions when the weather was bad, and led me toward the back of the restaurant to a private dining room with frosted glass doors. Through the translucent glass, I could make out 2 figures seated at a table covered with empty wine bottles and the remains of what must have been an elaborate meal. The maître d' knocked discreetly before opening the door, and I stepped. A scene of comfortable inebriation. Brian sat with his suit jacket discarded over an empty chair, his tie loosened on his normally perfect hair slightly disheveled. Across from him was a man I recognized as Richard Donovan, the CEO of a shipping company that Brian had been trying to secure as a client for months. Both men looked up as I entered, their expressions suggesting I'd interrupted a particularly amusing conversation. "Tom," Brian exclaimed, his smile wider and less restrained than usual. "Perfect timing. We were just celebrating." "Celebrating?" I echoed, glancing at the collection of empty bottles. "Richard has agreed to implement our security solutions across his entire fleet." Brian explained, his words careful but slightly elongated, a clear sign he was making an effort to sound sober. "It's the largest contract we've secured this year." "Congratulations," I said, genuinely pleased for him, despite my concern about his state. "That's excellent news." Richard Donovan pushed himself to his feet with the deliberate care of a man who knows he's had too much to drink but is determined to maintain his dignity. "Your boss is a persuasive man," he told me, extending his hand to Brian. "Looking forward to working together. Harrington, have your people call my people tomorrow to sort out the details." "Absolutely," Brian agreed, standing to shake. Donovan's hand movement seemed to unbalance him slightly, and he placed his other hand on the table to steady himself. A discreet hotel car service was already waiting for Donovan, summoned by the restaurant staff who were clearly accustomed to handling inebriated executives with maximum efficiency and minimum embarrassment. Once Donovan had been safely escorted out, Brian turned to me with an apologetic smile. "Sorry for the late night," he said, reaching for his jacket and nearly knocking over a water glass in the process. I caught it just in time, our fingers brushing briefly. "I'd and usually this isn't." He gestured vaguely at the empty bottles. "No need to explain," I assured him. "It sounds like you would good reason to celebrate." Brian nodded, then winced slightly at the movement. "Still not very professional of him. I think you're allowed to celebrate a major contract," I said, carefully helping him into his jacket when he struggled with the sleeves. "Let's get you home." The walk through the restaurant was an exercise in attempted dignity. Brian was more intoxicated than I'd ever seen him, but making a valiant effort to appear composed. As we passed through the main dining area, where a few late diners still lingered, I stayed close beside him, ready to provide support if needed, but careful not to embarrass him by being too obvious about it. Outside, the night air was cool and damp. A light drizzle having started while I was inside. Brian inhaled deeply as if trying to clear his shed, then stumbled slightly on the slick pavement. I caught his arm, steadying him. "Careful," I murmured, guiding him toward the car where the valet had brought it round. "I'm fine," Brian insisted, though didn't pull away from my supporting grip just a bit. The air hit me harder than I expected. I helped him into the back seat, made sure he was securely settled, then closed the door and circled around to the driver's side. Through their rearview mirror, I could see Brian leaning his head back against the seat, eyes closed, his usual composure. "A completely abandoned home?" I asked, starting the engine. Brian opened his eyes, meeting my gaze in the mirror. "Yes, please. And Tom, thank you for waiting." "No, it's late. It's my job," I reminded him gently, pulling away from the curb. "Still, you're very." He seemed to struggle for the right word, eventually settling on reliable. "I appreciate that." The drive to Brian's apartment normally took about 20 minutes at this time of night, when traffic was light. I drove carefully, mindful of their rain that was beginning to fall more heavily and the precious cargo in my back seat. Through the mirror, I could see Brian's eyes drifting closed again, his body swaying slightly with the movement of the car. We were about halfway to his splash when he suddenly sat forward, his face paling visibly, even in the dim light of the Corsa interior. "Tom, I need you to pull over now." I recognized the urgency in his voice and immediately signaled, pulling to the side off the road. Brian had blue eyes, slightly unfocused but still disconcertingly direct. "You're a good man, Tom." "Better than I deserve." The statement surprised me. "That's not true. You're a good employer, a good person." He made a dismissive sound, looking away. "I'm a workaholic who just got embarrassingly drunk with a client and vomited in front of his driver." "Not exactly CEO of the Year material. You closed a major deal and celebrated. It happens." I hesitated, then added, "And I'm not just your driver." Brian's gaze turned, my face questioning. No, I confirmed, though I wasn't entirely sure what I meant by it. "We've worked together for 2 years. I'd like to think we're friends of a sort." A small smile lifted at the corner of his mouth. "Friends, yes." I'd liked at the moment, felt charge hanging between us with possibilities I'd never allowed myself to consider, but Brian was drunk, vulnerable, and in no condition to be having any kind of meaningful conversation about our relationship, professional ethics, and basic decency. Demanded that I not take advantage of the situation. "You should get some sleep," I said, taking a step back. "I'll get you some more water and something for the headache you're going to have tomorrow." I went to the kitchen, filled a large glass with water, and found some painkillers in a cabinet where I'd once seen Brian retrieve some for a headache during a long day of meetings. When I returned to the bedroom, had managed to get himself under the covers, though the bedding was disheveled as if the process had been a struggle here. I said, placing the water and pills on his bedside table. "Take these when you wake up." Brian was looking at him with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, some mixture of gratitude, confusion, and something else that made me heart rate accelerate slightly. "You're not leaving, are you?" he asked, his voice quiet. The question caught me off guard. I thought you'd want to sleep." "I do, but I'm still not feeling great." And he trailed off, looking embarrassed. "Would you mind staying just until I fall asleep in case I need to?" It was a reasonable request. Hugh was still ill from the alcohol, and there was a real possibility He might need assistance again during the night as his driver. I could justify staying to ensure his well-being. As his friend, if that's what we were, it was the decent thing to do. Of course, I agreed. I'll be right here, Rafe. You need anything? Relief visibly washed over his features. Thank you. There's a guest room down the hall, if you want to rest, or the couch in the living room is surprisingly comfortable despite looking like a modernist tortured Avis. I smiled at his description of the angular leather sofa. I'd noticed in his living area. I'll be fine. Get some sleep. Brian nodded, his eyes already drifting. Closed. Wake me if the apartment catches fire. He mumbled, otherwise let Medi in peace until at least noon. I laughed softly, moving to turn off the bedside lamp. Good night, Brian. Night, Tommy, you're the best. His breathing deepened almost immediately. Exhaustion and alcohol pulling him quickly into sleep. I stood, watching him for a moment, allowing myself the indulgence of seeing him this way, vulnerable, unguarded as usual, carefully maintained facade. Completely absent in sleep, the lines of stability. Waited for the car to stop before he was fumbling with the door handle, pushing it open and leaning out just in time to bevilently ill on the wet pavement. I winced in sympathy, putting the car in park and turning on the hazard lights before getting out and circling around to his side. The rain was coming down steadily now, but Brian seemed oblivious to it as he remained half-hanging out of the car, hands braced on his knees. As Heck continued to retch, I stood beside him, helpless to do much beyond placing a supportive hand on his back and shielding him as best I could from the rain, with my jacket held above him after what seemed like an eternity but was probably only a minute or two. He straightened up, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. God, I'm sorry. He mumbled, genuine mortification in his voice. This is not how I wanted this evening to go. It happens, I said simply, offering him my handkerchief. Feel better? He took the cloth, wiping his face marginally, mostly embarrassed. No need to be, I assured him, helping him back into the car and closing the door back behind the wheel. I offered him a bottle of water from the supply I always kept in the car. Small sips, I advised as he accepted it gratefully, the rest off to drive past. In silence, Brian occasionally taking careful sips of water while I focused on getting us to his apartment as quickly and smoothly as possible. By the time I pulled into the private garage beneath his building, some off the color had returned to his face, but he still looked unsteady and worse for wear. Do you need help up to your apartment? I asked as I parked in his designated space. Brian hesitated, pried briefly, wearing with practicality before he nodded. If you wouldn't mind, I'm not sure I trust myself with the elevator buttons right now. I came around to help him from the car, and Helen on me more heavily than I expected as we made our way to the elevator. His body was warm against mine, and despite the lingering smell of wine and sickness, I couldn't help but be acutely aware of his proximity through it, of his arm across my shoulders, the brush of his hair against my cheek when he turned his head in the elevator, fumbled with his keycard that would allow access to the penthouse level, eventually handing it to me with a defeated sigh. My fine motor skills appear to have abandoned me. I swiped Theckert, pressed the button for the top floor, and continued to support him as the elevator ascended smoothly. Against the wall, closing his eyes again. I haven't been this drunk since my company's first major contract celebration 5 years ago, he admitted. He woke up with my face glued to my desk by my own drool, wearing one shoe and someone else's tithe. Anecdote was so unlike the composed, controlled Brian, I knew that I couldn't help but laugh hard to picture that high-opened one eye, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. I'm not always the buttoned-up CEO, you know. I contain multitudes. I never doubted it, I replied honestly. The elevator doors opened directly into the foyer of his apartment, a spacious minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a spectacular view of the city lights, now softened by the curtain of rain. I'd been here many times before, dropping Brian off or picking him up, occasionally waiting while he ran upstairs to change or grab something he'd forgotten, but I'd never stayed longer than necessary, never crossed the threshold beyond professional requirement. Tonight was different. Brian clearly needed assistance, and I couldn't in good conscience leave him to fend for himself when he could barely stand without swaying. Let's get you some more water and into bed, I suggested, guiding him through the apartment toward the kitchen. Brian nodded, then suddenly froze, his body tensing against mine. I'm going to be sick again, he managed before lurching toward what I knew was the powder room off the main hallway. I helped him get there just in time, stepping back to give him privacy as he dropped to his knees in front of the toilet. The sounds that followed made muse in sympathy. After a moment's hesitation, I went to the kitchen, filled a glass with and found a clean dish towel, which I dampened with cool water when I returned to the bathroom. Brian was sitting on the floor back against the wall, looking utterly miserable. His expensive suit was rumpled, and I noticed with dismay that he hadn't entirely made it to the toilet in time. There were traces of vomit on his shirt and tie. Here, I said, handing him the water. Small sips and this might help. I offered the cool cloth, which he pressed gratefully to his forehead. I'm a complete disaster, he muttered, closing his eyes. You should go home, Tom. You don't need to see this. I'm not leaving you like this, I said firmly. Do you think you can make it to your bedroom? You'll feel better once you're out of these clothes and lying down. Brian looked down at himself, seeming to notice the state of his shirt for the first time. Christ, I'm a mess. Nothing that can't be fixed, I assured him. Come on, let's get you up. Getting Brian from the bathroom to his bedroom was a slow process. He was still unsteady and now also weak from being sick, leaning heavily on me as we navigated the hallway to the master suite. His bedroom was as I'd imagined it, not that I'd spent time imagining Brian's bedroom, of course. Spacious and elegant with thesum floor tasseling windows as the living area, a king-sized bed with simple but clearly expensive bedding and decoration beyond a few framed black and white photographs that appeared to be landscapes. I helped him sit on the edge of the bed, where he immediately leaned forward. Elbows on knees, head in hands. The room is spinning, he complained. Make it stop. It will soon, I promised. Let's get you out off those dirty clothes first. The statement hung in the air. Between us, suddenly fraught with implications I hadn't considered. I was offering to undress my employer. Something that went far beyond my responsibilities and ventured into territory I'd been careful to avoid in all our interactions. Brian seemed too miserable to notice the potential awkwardness. He merely nodded, already attempting to loosen his tea further with fingers that didn't. It seemed to be cooperating. Let me, I said, gently stepping between his knees to reach Histy up close. I could see the stubble beginning to darken his jaw, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight chapping of his lips from dehydration. I focused on the task at hand carefully, unknotting his tie and pulling it free from his collar. Next came his suit jacket, which he'd put back in for the drive. I helped him shrug out of it, careful to avoid any soiled area. Sand laid it aside. The dress shirt beneath was partially stained, particularly around the collar and down. The front arms up, I instructed, and Brian complied with the agility of the truly drunk, raising his arms so I could pull his shirt free from his trousers and begin unbuttoning it from the bottom up. It was an intimate act, undressing another person, especially one I'd spent years carefully maintaining professional boundaries with. My fingers worked methodically, trying not to linger, not to notice the increasingly exposed skin as each button came free. Brian's eyes were closed again, his breathing slow and measured, as if he was concentrating on not being sick again. When I reached the last button, Athie's collar, I gently pulled the shirt open and helped him remove it, revealing a plain white undershirt beneath that had, unfortunately, not escaped the effects of his illness. There was a visible stain across the front, and Thesmal, though not overwhelming, was definitely present. This needs to come off too, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral and professional. Brian nodded, raising his arms. Again, without opening his eyes, I grasped the hem of the undershirt and pulled it up and over his head, my knuckles brushing against the warm skin of his torso. In the process, and then Brian was sitting before me, bare-chested and vulnerable in a way I'd never seen him. He was in good shape. Iknu, he ran regularly and sometimes mentioned workouts, though I'd never known him to make a big deal about the way some of his peers did. His chest and shoulders were broad, lightly dusted, with dark hair that narrowed to a trail disappearing into his trousers. There was a small scar near his left collarbone that I'd never known about, and another along his right ribs. I realized I was staring and quickly averted my eyes, turning to locate his closet. Let me find you something Cliento sleep in. Dress up, Brian mumbled, gesturing vaguely toward a modern-looking chest of drawers near the bathroom door's second drawer. T-shirts. I found what I was looking for, a soft gray t-shirt that looked well worn and comfortable, and returned to help him put it on. As I pulled it over his head, our eyes met briefly and I saw a flicker of something, embarrassment, gratitude, confusion, before he looked away. Now, your trousers, I said, trying to sound matter-of-fact about it. Can you stand, or should two can stand? Brian insisted, pushing himself up from the bed with visible effort. He swayed slightly and I placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. He reached for his belt, fumbling with the buckle before letting out a frustrated sigh. My fingers aren't working properly. Let me, I offered, again trying to ignore the intimacy of the moment as I carefully unbuckled his belt, then worked on the button and zipper of his trousers. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on my hands, refusing to look up at Brian's face or down at what I was revealing. His trousers fell to pool around his ankles, leaving him in dark boxer briefs that thankfully appeared to have escaped soiling. I knelt to help him step out of the trousers, aware of the heat of his skin near my face, the slight trembling of his legs as he balanced it with one hand on my shoulder. Pajama pants? I asked, still kneeling, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Brian replied, his voice equally strained. Or just fourth drawers wet pants? I found a pair of black sweatpants in the indicated drawer and returned to help him step into the mag, keeping my eyes averted as much as possible. When he was finally dressed in clean, comfortable clothes, I guided him to sit on the edge of the bed. Again, who should try to drink some more water. I suggested it will help with the hangover tomorrow. Brian nodded, accepting the glass. I handed him from the bedside table. He took several small sips, then set it down with exaggerated care. Thank you, he said, looking up at me with an intensity that caught me off guard. This is above and beyond your job description. It's not a... I assured him. That's what I hesitated, unsure how to define what were to each other in this moment. Employer and employee seemed to cold friends. Not quite accurate. That's what people do for each other, I finished lamely. Brian continued to look at me, hisses around, high size smoothed out, making him look younger, more like the startup founder he'd been when he began his company. Than polished CEO he'd become. I gathered his soiled clothes, taking them to the laundry room I'd noticed off the kitchen. After pre-treating the stains as best I could, I put them in the washing machine and started a cycle. It seemed at the least I could do then. I wandered back to the living room, settling on the supposedly uncomfortable SF, which was indeed better. Then it looked. I texted my roommate to let him know I wouldn't be home tonight due to work, then set an alarm on my phone. Despite Brian's joke about sleeping until noon, I knew him well enough to ascertain he'd want to be up at a reasonable hour. Hangover or not, he had never been one to waste a day, even a weekend, as I made myself as comfortable as possible on the sofa. I reflected on the evening's events. I had crossed a line in our professional relationship, though at Brian's request and out of genuine concern for his welfare. Still, I couldn't help but wonder if things would be awkward between us in the morning, if he would regret allowing me to see Jim in such a vulnerable state. More concerning was my own reaction to the evening, the way my heart had raced when I helped him undress, the protective instinct that had surged through me when I saw him ill and miserable, the pleasure I'd felt at his suggestion that we were friends. These feelings went beyond professional concern, or even friendship, and I couldn't continue to deny their existence, at least to myself. I was falling for my employer, had been falling, if I was honest, for months, and that reality made the coming morning even more complicated because regardless of any personal feelings, Brian was still my boss, still drunk when he'd asked me to stay, and still, as far as I knew, entirely lunatic in men romantically. With these troubling thoughts circling in my mind, I eventually drifted into an uneasy. On the unexpectedly comfortable sofa, I woke to the sound of movement in the kitchen. Checking my phone, I saw it was just past 7 hours before my alarm was set to go off. I sat up, orienting myself in the unfamiliar surroundings, memories of the previous night rushing back. Following the noise, I found Brian in the kitchen, looking considerably worse for wear, but definitely more coherent than when I'd last seen him. He was still wearing the t-shirt and sweatpants I'd helped him into. His hair was disheveled, and his eyes were bloodshot, but he was upright and operating the coffee maker with reasonable competence. He looked up as I entered, a flash of something embarrassment, relief crossing his features before he schooled them into a more neutral expression. "Good morning," he said, his voice slightly raspy. "Coffee, please," I replied, suddenly aware that I was wrinkled and disheveled from sleeping in my clothes. I ran a hand self-consciously through my hair, trying to smooth it down. "How are you feeling?" Brian winced. "Like I've been hit by a truck, followed by a train, and then possibly stomped on by elephants. But I've taken the pills you left, and coffee will help." He poured 2 mugs, sliding one across the counter. "To me, thank you for staying and for everything else last night." The careful vagueness of everything else suggested he remembered at least some of what had happened, including my assistance with his soiled clothing. I accepted the coffee, grateful for something to do with my hands. "No problem. I was concerned about you." Brian took a sip of his coffee, grimacing slightly as if even that was uncomfortable. "I put your clothes in the dryer," he said. "I noticed you'd started the washer. That was thoughtful of you. It seemed like the least I could do." I replied. An awkward silence fell between us, both of us holding our coffee mugs like shields against the unspoken tension in the room. I wasn't sure what to say. Should I act as if nothing unusual had happened, acknowledge the intimacy of the previous night, but trust him it wouldn't affect our professional relationship, make a joke to diffuse their tension? Brian solved the dilemma by speaking first. "I owe you an apology," he said, setting his mug down with deliberate care. "Last night was unprofessional of me, and I put you in an awkward position." "You don't need to apologize." I assured him it was a celebration. "These things happen, not to me." "They don't," he countered. "I pride myself on self-control and maintaining certain standards. Last night I failed spectacularly. On both counts. Everyone is allowed an off night," I said, "and you closed a major deal that's worth celebrating." Brian studied at him for a moment, his bloodshot eyes surprisingly intent. "Your very forgiving." I shrugged, uncomfortable under his scrutiny. "There's nothing to forgive. You got drunk. I helped you home." "End of story, is it though?" Brian asked, his voice quieter now, "because I remember most of last night. Tom, I remember you helping me undress. I remember asking you to stay. I remember thinking things I probably shouldn't have been thinking about my driver." My breath caught in my throat. Had he misheard him? What kinds of things?" Brian ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, a gesture of frustration or perhaps nervousness. "Things I've been thinking for longer than I care to admit, but have been professional enough not to act on until last night, when alcohol apparently dissolved all my careful construct boundaries." My heart was pounding now, a mixture of hope and anxiety, making it difficult to focus. "Brian, you were drunk. Whatever you thought or said, it doesn't have to change anything between us if you don't want it to." "What if I do want it to?" he asked, his gaze direct despite the obvious discomfort of his hangover. "What if?" I've been wanting it to change for months, but didn't know how to broach the subject without being completely inappropriate. I set my coffee mug down carefully, afraid my suddenly trembling hands might drop it. "Are you saying?"
Brian winced. "Like I've been hit by a truck, followed by a train, and then possibly stomped on by elephants. But I've taken the pills you left, and coffee will help." He poured 2 mugs, sliding one across the counter to me. "Thank you for staying, and for everything else last night." The careful vagueness of everything else suggested he remembered at least some of what had happened, including my assistance with his soiled clothing. He accepted the coffee, grateful for something to do with my hands. "No problem. I was concerned about you." Brian took a sip of his coffee, grimacing slightly, as if even that was uncomfortable. "I put your clothes in the dryer," He said, I noticed you'd started the washer. That was thoughtful of you. It seemed like the least I could do, I replied. An awkward silence fell between us, both of us holding our coffee mugs like shields against the unspoken tension in the room. I wasn't sure what to say should. I act as if nothing unusual had happened, acknowledged the intimacy of the previous night, but him it wouldn't affect our professional relationship, make a joke to diffuse the tension. Brian solved the dilemma by speaking first. I owe you an apology, he said, setting his mug down with deliberate care. Last night was unprofessional of me, and I put you in an awkward position. You don't need to apologize. I assured him it was a celebration. These things happen, not to me. They don't, he countered. I pride myself on self-control and maintaining certain standards. Last night I failed spectacularly. On both counts, everyone is allowed an off night, I said, and you closed a major deal that's worth celebrating. Brian studied him for a moment, his bloodshot eyes surprisingly intent. Your very forgiving. I shrugged, uncomfortable under his scrutiny. There's nothing to forgive. You got drunk. I helped you home. And off story is it though? Brian asked, his voice quieter now, because I remember most of last night. Tom, I remember you helping me undress. I remember asking you to stay. I remember thinking things I probably shouldn't have been thinking about my driver. My breath caught in my throat. Had he misheard him? What kinds of things? Brian ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, a gesture of frustration, or perhaps nervousness. Things I've been thinking for longer than I care to admit, but have been professional enough not to act on until last night, when alcohol apparently dissolved all my careful construct boundaries. My heart was pounding now, a mixture of hope and anxiety, making it difficult to focus. Brian, you were drunk. Whatever you thought or said, it doesn't have to change anything between us. If you don't want it to. What if I do want it to? He asked, his gaze direct despite the obvious discomfort of his hangover. What if? I've been wanting it to change for months, but didn't know how to broach the subject without being completely inappropriate. I set my coffee mug down carefully, afraid my suddenly trembling hands might drop it.